This is Brian Kemple of Continuum Philosophical Insight, and this is the third and final video in which I discuss the paper I delivered in March of 2019 at Aquinas College on artificial intelligence and concept formation. And today I'm going to wrap it up and talk a bit about the hidden dangers of AI and conclude with a sort of freewheeling, on-the-spot, extemporaneous meditation, I guess, on the nature of human cognition and how that is misunderstood today with the computational metaphors, which are so often given for human understanding. Now, in the previous video, I ended by talking a little bit about the key danger of AI. That is not the one I think that is the dystopian danger, but the one that comes from artificial intelligence becoming not an enemy of ours, but being something of too good of a servant. So the original tagline for this talk, which was featured on the poster that I submitted for its promotion, is that we shape our algorithms and then they shape us. And this notion, right, we shape our algorithms and then they shape us, is borrowed from a review of Marshall McLuhan's 1964 book, Understanding Media, a review written by Father John Culkin, who wrote that we shape our tools and then they shape us. Father Culkin's statement, which was often has been misattributed to McLuhan, was itself a statement derived from Winston Churchill, who, in observing the British parliamentary chambers, said that we shape our buildings and then they shape us. The British parliamentary chambers are particularly conducive to having two separate and opposed parties. Now, all three iterations of the idea that we individually fashion things that in turn change us point out the same fundamental fact of human and indeed all animal existence, namely that we are subject to habitual attunement through customs and environments, including, and maybe even especially, the customs and environments that we ourselves produce. In other words, our habits are influenced not merely by what we interact with, but how those things force or induce us to interact. In other words, it's not just about the content, but also about the medium. So we're influenced not only by what we see on TV, but the fact that we watch TV at all. Not only by the constant stream of content through our smartphones, but the fact that we stare into that little screen so often throughout the day at all. The question we then ought to ask here today is, how will artificial intelligence shape our habits? That is not just what will artificial intelligence make possible for us, what will it do for our, the content of our thinking, the content of our action, but what will it do in shaping how we behave on a day-to-day basis? And for that matter, I think it's a question worth asking, how is artificial intelligence already shaping our habits? Now, what I'm about to say is far from exhaustive, and based in speculation about possibilities rather than in any sort of empirical research. I think we can identify three ways in which widespread artificial intelligence applications, particularly artificial intelligence that vastly exceeds our own capacity for problem solving in the context of referential meaning, as I described in the previous video, three ways in which our habits may dramatically shift from the ubiquitous presence of artificial intelligence. Now, the first of these is the increase of indolence. That is laziness, which is above all else a habit, and I think one which people are already far too willing to excuse. And I give the name indolence just to put a more formal label on it and sort of distinguish it from perhaps common conceptions of laziness. Which is not to say that everyone who is lazy is entirely at fault for their laziness. It is a habit that has attended our general loss of the sense of purpose or struggle in Western society, such that this habit of laziness, this indolence, develops in parallel to depression, anxiety, or any number of psychological disorders, which are themselves rooted in a background cosmological nihilism, which denies any ultimate purpose to our existence. That is, I think laziness is something easier abated when there is a context in which we might be forced to work through necessity. In contrast, not in contrast, that is to say that in contrast to today, in contrast to the situation that we're in today, when our choices are between wallowing in introspective misery and starving, or trudging through misery and being able to eat, most people will choose to trudge rather than wallow. But through advances in technology, few people today have the need to trudge. We may wallow without starving. And this is the difference that I'm trying to hint at with the terminology of indolence rather than mere laziness. Beyond the advance in technology, opportunities to trudge are decreasing. That is, there seems to be fewer and fewer things that we are really forced to do that we don't want to do. And so if artificial intelligence takes over all but the most advanced, difficult, and nuanced intellectual jobs, it is possible that the entire framework through which most human beings for most of history have discovered and maintained purpose, that is, through hard work, will be taken away entirely. In consequence, our willingness to expend effort will likely suffer. Not just that we'll put things off or procrastinate, but we'll have no purpose that we find is a driving one for really trying to do something or to make something of ourselves or to expend effort in doing something bigger or better than ourselves. So the second dramatic shift possible is the enervation of our habits which give rise to understanding. In other words, the habits of our perceptual faculties, which are or ought to be attuned towards improvement in our faculty of intellectual understanding, assist in this largely by focusing themselves on solving problems. We improve our retentive capacities and our evaluative capacities by dealing with problems in the world around us. Now, it is possible, I suppose, that the hopes of the AI enthusiasts will be realized, and that in the spread of AI throughout the world of work, our minds are freed from troubling about, at least inconsequential, practical concerns, and left to work through the persistent theoretical difficulties that attend being human. It is also possible, however, and given the tendencies of human nature that have been on display for millennia, I think likely, that we, or at least most of us, will give in to the aforementioned indolence and simply not care about the theoretical problems, so long as the practical seem well enough solved. But even if we do not give in to this particular flavor of laziness, even if we do not collapse in on ourselves through a lack of purpose, we may very well be less well attuned for thinking nonetheless. That is, we already implicitly consider the artificial intelligence applications of search engines, for instance, as a replacement for retention in many ways, which is not the best way to use such an application, a search engine application. Rather, it ought to be an extension of our retentive capacity, but that's a digression I'm not quite sure I want to get into here. Perhaps I'll circle back around to it at the end of the talk that I'm giving. But perhaps not. That is to say that we're not angelic creatures of pure intellect. Rather, our intellects rely on the perceptual faculties in order to understand anything at all. can we really anticipate an improvement in intellectual insight if we enervate the perceptual faculties and habits on which that insight relies? And to give just one other example, let's consider something like the idea of a scheduling assistant. Now, assistants, and for people in business, men and women, and executives especially, are a long-standing tradition, and that scheduling is the job of an assistant is a long-standing notion. But I think there's something different about the way in which we look at scheduling today in terms of these digital assistants that we have. When we say, Alexa, remind me to pick up groceries tomorrow after work or something like that. I think this is a different way of being attuned and a different way of being habituated than dealing with a real person in setting out your schedule. That is, for one thing, I think there's a certain degree of clarity which is required in communicating to another human being, which is perhaps not required in communicating to a device or a program. That is, the device of the program is mostly going to be programmed to respond back to you in some way or another with your own words. It's going to repeat the message back to you just as it was given to you. Or it will simply fit it into a framework that it already has ready at hand, ready and existing. So exactly what it is that you're trying to communicate to a personal assistant, a real personal assistant, requires a different way of phrasing it. And I think that there's something which is lost in trying to phrase it to a machine. Moreover, I think there's a tendency to perhaps not take as much responsibility for one's schedule with regards to fobbing it all off onto a digital assistant. You start to put things which aren't even work-related, right, into your digital assistant that you probably would not give to your personal assistant in a business setting. You're not going to have it tell you that, you need to do this with your wife or your son or what have you. There's going to be aspects of your personal life which are still fully your responsibility to manage. And so this is a kind of, sort of habituation, which changes with the increased pervasiveness of artificial intelligence. Now, the third dramatic shift is, I think, a social one, and I suppose I've already hinted at this with the previous. But that is to say that artificial intelligence has already, unbeknownst to us, or at least to many of us, begun mediating our social interactions. So far, this has come to light only in regards to, really, fake news, and specifically how digital robots have spread false stories or inaccurate details to influence political outcomes. But the fact of the matter is that the interference is far more widespread than that. Anyone familiar with the practices of search engine optimization, that is the practice of articulating keywords and phrases in your website, as well as length, quality, and linked-to-ness of your content, in order to attain a better ranking in search engine results, is aware that much of the practice is mediated on both ends by algorithms functioning in a quasi-intelligent manner. Likewise with all major social media. The posts you see, at least first and foremost, are decided by algorithms which rank them as worthy of being seen, partly in a way which is custom-tailored to your previous interactions on the site, and partly based on impersonal criteria for the kind of content the platform wants to promote. For instance, when you go to Twitter and you look at the tweets that are at the top, or the ones that are brought up in a little section called In Case You Missed It, these are not necessarily the things that you most want to see, but may perhaps be the things that Twitter most wants you to see. In other words, there's a bit of social engineering going on there. At the same time, you'll see that many posts, depending upon who posted it and the content of the post, will require you to click a link, sometimes multiple times, to confirm that you want to see it, even if there's nothing in there, rather, that is in any way insidious, but simply based on previous interactions of the user, or perhaps what's in the user's avatar, or something along those lines. And this is not decided on a personal basis, but an algorithmic one. Perhaps even sometimes the fact that someone has been suspended will influence how their content is displayed. But as the internet spreads from social networking to things, as it becomes ubiquitous in our devices, it begins to alter our social interactions also in the quote-unquote real world. Many of our species, specifically human habits, are socially enacted, both good and bad, both virtues and vices. We attain these virtues and vices by navigating problems that occur in the so-called real world, and especially problems that occur in our interaction with other persons. I think anyone who has been in what I guess most would consider a successful intimate relationship for any length of time knows that successfully dealing with your problems, especially problems of communication, not only allows for continuous harmonious coexistence, but actually deepens your unity with that other person. Something as simple as communicating about the shopping list, or doing the laundry, or coordinating your schedules, which little things can become big problems if they disrupt the unity of a couple. These little things do a lot to reinforce our unity with another person when we cooperatively resolve them. If an artificial intelligence can mediate all this, say by keeping track of what is in your refrigerator and reordering it for you, or doing your laundry, or automatically optimizing both of your schedules, do we not lose something then that can only be gained through the struggle? That is, sometimes one member or one part of a couple might have to make a sacrifice for the other, might have to change his or her schedule or his or her preferences in order to accommodate the other, and by doing that shows a certain degree of love for the other. But if the AI can solve that problem, then that opportunity to demonstrate that love is no longer given. It's something which is taken care of for the individual, taken care of so that there's no struggle which has to be gone through, and so, I don't know, nothing ventured, nothing gained, something along those lines. There's not a whole lot, I think, that a whole lot of us, a whole bunch of us who really want to struggle, and so we seek to avoid it, but to what degree do we not lose something, generally speaking, by struggling? Do we not lose opportunities, at the very least, to become better persons, to become more virtuous persons through overcoming the difficulties? If the robots can do it all for us, even in these little things, I think we really do start to lose something of how we become better human beings. Now, it's entirely possible, at this late stage of this now 3-part presentation, that I sound like a paranoid AI alarmist who believes that we will inevitably be turned by our own acceptance of the robots into slobbering, slackjawed idiots. It's untrue. That is, I believe we are already slobbering, slackjawed idiots. Nor, for that matter, am I a general technophobe. I own a desktop computer, which I'm using right now to record this, with 2 monitors, and I have a laptop and a tablet and a relatively recent high-end smartphone, although I guess that's quickly being obsolesced. I use Bluetooth headphones that have all sorts of advanced features in them. The car I drive is all sorts of driver assist safety technology, and I use social media daily, probably too much. And I love that with Google and Wikipedia, I can find out how badly IBM's Watson beat Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter in Games of Jeopardy, or in what year Martin Heidegger first went to Freiburg University, and all really in a matter of a few seconds. I do believe, however, that we run quite a danger of letting artificial intelligence get out of hand. Not simply in that killer robot sense, but more perniciously in the sense of undermining the essential elements of our humanity. A humanity that our current lack of understanding about has led to our widespread condition of unthinking. That is, I think that we have really swallowed, whole and entire, this notion that our thinking is the same as a computational thinking, and that it is differentiated from what we can achieve by computers only at present by a degree of complexity. I think that we have not recognized ourselves for what we truly are, ourselves as these, excuse me, as these meaning-oriented, meaning-grasping individuals that we really are. And so I think that the greatest danger we face from a ubiquitous AI presence in our lives is less what it will do to us, and much more what we will do or not do for ourselves. Namely, that we will deepen our lack of self-understanding, that we will redouble our pursuits of a perfected utopian world, one with no problems, no wants, no lacks, no needs, no struggles, and consequently no understanding or purpose or happiness. I think we've already gone down this road a lot farther than most of us realize. I think we have been eroding our sense of purpose, our understanding of understanding, and our conception of happiness a lot more than most of us realize. And it's spreading, this erosion. It's permeating not just our media, not just the youth, not just a certain generation, not just people who have or who lack a certain belief in God or one or another religious creed, but it's becoming part and parcel of our lives. And a large driver of it is the way in which we have adopted the use of technology. It's not to say the technologies themselves are entirely responsible for this, but I do believe that we have incorporated them into our lives in a very irresponsible way. And I, too, am guilty of that irresponsible incorporation. Who doesn't, from time to time, in a moment of boredom, pull out their smartphone and begin browsing around social media or looking through even old emails or just looking for anything to occupy your mind, to distract your mind, to keep you from thinking about things that perhaps you should think about. Maybe they're things that you find painful or uncomfortable or unpleasant to think about, but they're probably important things nevertheless. And so that's the conclusion, I guess the official conclusion of the presentation. Now there's a lot more that I could say. I could say a lot more about how we could use technology as extensions of our capacities, and how I think that this is really the responsible way to go about viewing technology, in the sense of extension, in the sense of what it can do to help us further our capacities. But I think that might be a presentation for another time. It's probably something that I want to work out with greater clarity. At any rate, these and other such issues are ones that I'm always interested in discussing. I try to be a fairly open person, open to conversation, open to exchange. it's something that, for one, I try to discuss in my Lyceum program that I strongly encourage you who have made it this far in listening to check out, and I've included a link to that below. I have some very interesting technologically minded people in the Lyceum, people from technological fields wide and far, and certainly ones with more expertise than I have myself. And a frequent topic of discussion is this notion of the sort of computational modeling of human cognition. This idea that all we're doing is processing things in the same way that a computer does, and that much of our experience, our lived experience of encountering things cognitively, is almost sort of this epiphenomenal illusion, right? This something which appears to us in a way as sort of almost a kind of making sense of what's going on neurologically, chemically, sort of a computational process in our brains. This is the way that it has been just sort of de facto accepted, because the modeling seems to explain certain phenomena and not really challenged or considered with a whole lot of depth. So, at any rate, I'm just sort of rambling now at this point, and I should probably wrap it up and get back to all the other work that I've taken on and not completed. But I saw a moment to get this done this morning, and so I decided to leap on that moment and try to push through. So, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for entertaining what I have to say. And please, by all means, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to share them below on the YouTube channel, to send me an email, to visit my website and explore around, or perhaps even to consider signing up for the Lyceum. Thank you.